Hey guys, Erin here with Southern Girl Exotics. Welcome back to my channel. So I am finally getting to one of the videos I had mentioned the topic of on my social media, and you guys had given me some questions. Unfortunately, some of these videos take me a really long time to put the content together, so I do some easier videos I'm finding so that I can make sure I get something out, and this is one of those longer videos that I just want to make sure I touch on all the important information and get it in there. So it's taken me longer to get this video out, but we are going to do a video answering the most common breeding questions. So again, I did a poll and I kind of asked other breeders as well as newer keepers and breeders what their common questions are. I related this to ones that I commonly get in my DMs as well, and I kind of tried to put it all in a couple sections. So I may not answer each question individually, but each topic section should cover the majority of any questions. Now, this is going to be strictly based on my experience. There are tons of different ways to successfully breed a lot of species, and Gargs are one of them. This is just what I have found works for me, how I've been the most successful. And one thing I always say in this hobby is to remain teachable, and I am always learning new things, whether that is from the animals themselves or from other breeders with much more experience than me. So again, this is all based on my experience, how I do things. Hopefully you'll enjoy the content. Hopefully it'll be something that can be helpful. Hopefully it'll answer all the questions. Either way, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Definitely give it a thumbs up. Definitely subscribe, and I will see you guys at the end of the video. Thanks for watching. So let me start by saying I in no way by any means have the perfect formula for breeding gargoyle geckos. Every one of them is an individual. Every one of them is going to be a little different with how they respond to their environment, to a breeding situation, to egg laying. So every one of them is going to be somewhat different. So most breeders are going to have different techniques or different avenues that they have found works for them. So question number one, how much is the overall startup cost to breed gargoyle geckos? This is a question that I cannot give you an exact figure on. It depends, first off, how many you want to start with, what quality you want to start with. Say you want to start with an animal like this. So just the single animal, you're going to pay probably $2,000 to $3,000 for this animal. You could start as low as, there's some really nice Gargs on the market for as low as $600-700. If they have good lineage, we've talked about this in a previous video. If they have good lineage and they may not be visually the best looking, but you know that the lineage is there of whatever traits you're inspired to work with, you can also buy a more affordable pair with just good parents. So there's no way for me to answer this, but I can give you an idea of what you need to consider when you are thinking about the expenses. So again, number one, you're going to consider how many animals do you want to start with? One pair, two pair, etc. What quality do you want your animals to be? If you're working with reds, the price is going to be a little higher than most oranges, or especially browns, whites, blacks. If you're wanting to work with blotches, blotches are really starting to come into popularity. So again, if you're going to go into super blotches or want to build your way up to super blotches, that's going to make a difference in what the quality and cost is you're going to put into your animals. Next, you need to think about enclosures. So I would say an 18 by 18 by 24 is the minimum for two smaller sized breeding gargoyle geckos. And then you have to think about separating them in the off season. So you're going to have two enclosures. We can be kind of generous and say an 18 by 18 by 24, maybe if you find it used, $100. Really, they're like $250 these days for a single one, but you may be able to find them used. Then you have to consider, of course, decorating both enclosures. Then you have to consider food for both animals. Now, when I am breeding animals, They get a different diet than just my grow outs or animals that are not breeding. They need higher protein, in my opinion. They need more calcium and vitamin, a better vitamin regimen. So those are all things that you're going to have to invest in. Then you have to consider the offspring from these guys. Now, a really productive Garg could give you 5, 6 clutches for a season. Majority of them are going to give you around 3, maybe 4. That's 2 eggs each time they lay. That's going to be anywhere between 8 and 12 babies for one season. You got to be able to house those. You could do shoe boxes. Those are the new fad, and I love mine to do my hatchlings in. About $40 for 12 of them. If you're going to get into a rack system for the babies, you're going to spend anywhere from several $100s up to $1,000. So you have to consider housing the babies and then, of course, feeding them. Then you need to consider the fact that you may not sell them. Nobody ever seems to consider that you may end up sitting on these babies. Then, on top of that, you need to consider any extra expenses. What if your female gets egg bound? What if your male prolapses? What if they have an injury during breeding? Vet care. If you don't have some type of care credit or something that you can put on the tab, then you're going to have some reserve money. I would say a good roundabout price for starting out breeding Gargs would be around $4,000-$5,000 to get everything. That's not entailing feeding them that you're going to have to repetitively spend money on monthly, weekly, again, vet visits, but to get cages, to make sure that you have something for when the babies hatch, hatching medium, to hatch the babies in if you're going to use an incubator. So all of that stuff, I would say around $5,000 is a good startup. But again, you may want to go big or go home and get some really high quality animals where you're spending $5,000 a piece on the animals. So I can't really answer this question, but I can kind of give you a ballpark figure and kind of give you some ideas of what you need to consider when starting out. All right, next question. Super good question. How many guards should I have to start my breeding process? This is a great question because a lot of times with reptiles, it makes common sense that you would have a couple females, a few females, and one male that can go to all of, right? You can put one male with several different females because all he has to do is breed 1 or 2 times, and then you can switch him to another female. Females, we can't do that. We can only breed them to one male during each season, right? Guards are finicky. So even though this is common sense, what seems like common sense when we're breeding these animals, a lot of times what we find is that one, our males have not grown as much as our females. I actually find that when my males are at least 3 years old and at least 50 grams, I'm going to have the most success. So I always tell people, instead of focusing on having several females to one male when you're starting up, you need to make sure you have some backup males. You need to make sure you're growing out 2 or 3 even backup equal quality males, just in case 1 or 2 of your males are not going to be ready by the time you're ready to pair your female. So I think this is a great question because I think you need to not focus on having multiple females so you can get the max amount of eggs from one male. So you need to actually make sure, I would say, a 3-3. So you got 3 males, 3 females. If you want to do a trio, at least you have a couple backup males in case 1 or 2 even are not up to par when breeding season gets there, or your females have come into sexual maturity, because that's really going to suck. I've learned this the hard way first starting out. I did the same thing. I got a couple females, I only had 1 male, and sure enough, when I decided I wanted to start breeding them, which was shortly after, yeah, it was a no-go because my male was way too small, and then I had to wait and grow out several more males, so it becomes a big process. All right, enclosure size, decor, habitat, needs, etc. So again, this is going to be subjective. However you feel best setting up your Garg, you're going to do it just like you would any arboreal animal. I personally recommend 18 by 18 by 24 as the absolute minimum if you're going to do a pair. If you have a smaller size trio, like in the 45 to 55 gram mark, you could do a trio in an 18 by 18 by 24. I personally love doing trios in my 18 by 18 by 30s. That extra 6 inches seems like a ton of space once you get it decorated. So again, and then if you're going to go bigger than that, more females, then you're going to have to go bigger than that. So again, once you get your female and your male up to age and weight to start breeding, you can start with an 18 by 18 by 24. If it seems too small, go bigger. So again, it's going to be subjective. I personally think that it is perfect for them. It gives them enough space to get out of each other's way if they want to get out of each other's way, but they can also easily find each other to do the business, lay eggs, get to know one another, etc. As far as decor, you could go bioactive. I'm sure they would love that. Bioactive enclosures are amazing. You could do that. You could do, excuse me, you could do faux plants and bioactive bottom if you wanted to do just like having isopods, things like that in there. You can go fully fake, but the point that I think you need to stress when you're putting their enclosures together is going to make sure that you're utilizing all of the space. A lot of times people will have an 18 by 18 by 24 and the perch stops right in the middle. The cork bark doesn't go any higher than the middle, and you have this whole half a tank that's not being used. If you utilize all the space in your tank, your garg will get to utilize all that space and it won't feel like it doesn't have enough room like it does when you're only allowing it to utilize half the tank. Although we do want them to be able to escape at times each other. So as long as you have perches that allow them to utilize all the space in an 18 by 18 by 24, and you've given them good coverage, plenty of places to hide from one another. That's why cork tubes are so good, because typically if a female's just had enough, she doesn't want to be bothered, she can go in a cork tube and a male can't bother her there. So that's why I like having a couple cork tubes in mine. However, again, how you want to decorate it is going to be completely up to you. The main thing to focus on is just making sure that you're utilizing the entire space and that you have enough coverage so that they are not getting on each other's nerves, just in each other's face non-stop. As far as UVB is always going to be an awesome addition. Um, I personally just don't have the outlets to add UVB to all of my enclosures, but it's an incredible addition, especially for egg laying females, for metabolizing nutrients. It's amazing. So UVB, you can't go wrong. You want to do a tropical bulb. This is a tropical species, 5.0 or 2.0 or lower. But yes, if you want to do UVB, I think that's amazing, especially if you're going to do a bioactive, but even if you're not, absolutely. If you're like me and you just don't have the plugins to give every enclosure you have UVB lighting, that's okay. Because the good thing is that we've been smart enough over the years to figure out that we can still hit those nutritional marks with diet. So if you're not going to do UVB, then don't worry about it. Focus on giving them a varied diet, paying attention to the calcium and phosphorus ratios in your diet, giving them a good vitamin and mineral regimen, and they will still thrive, be excellent egg layers, excellent breeders. But yeah, if you want to do UVB, go for it. That's an excellent addition anytime you want to add it to a reptile's enclosure. All right, next question. When do we pair these guys? I'm assuming this question means when in the year do I pair them up? I shoot for the winter. I like to give them 6 months on, 6 months separated. So typically January, sometimes as early as December. If they stopped laying earlier that year, then I may pair them up as early as December. But I like to do any time between December and March to start my pairings. Usually gargs have to settle in a little bit to each other. They're not going to be like crested geckos where you can typically throw them in a box and they're going to copulate right there in front of you and then go on their way. Gargs are a lot more secretive about it, and they like to do it at night. They like to do it in the privacy of their own enclosure without peeping toms watching them. So typically these guys have to settle into having their mates in the cage. They do have like a courting process, so that might be part of the reason why it doesn't happen so quickly. But for me, if I put them together around December, January, typically within 3 or 4 more months, I'll start getting eggs. Usually by March or April, I'm starting to get my first set of eggs from each female. Now again, this is just how I do it. Some people may do it differently, and that's perfectly fine. I do not keep these guys together year round. I have tried that before. 2 females, both times the males ended up losing their tails several times. And the females will actually eat their tails. I had one male that prolapsed because actually both males ended up prolapsing because of it. And then one of the males had injury to his hemipene, where I guess he was trying to mate with the female and she had had enough and bit half of his hemipene off. So it can be a nightmare if you leave them around year round, just in my personal experience. And I also think you need to give them a break anyways. These guys do very, very well if you let them rest, especially the females, so they can get nice and fat like this. They're going to be well rested and be more apt to be productive and responsive when you do pair them up with a male versus one that is exhausted and annoyed by being aggravated by a male for 12 months straight. So again, I recommend that you 6 months on, 6 months off, start January through March. Anytime in there is good to pair them, and then let them run for 6 months. Typically, a female is not going to give you more eggs than that anyways. Once they're through their 3rd, maybe 4th clutch, it's very rare you're going to get 5, 6, 7 clutches from a crest or a gargoyle gecko like you would a crested gecko. So it's better just to go ahead and separate them after 6 months, let them chill out, and fatten back up for the next season. All right, guys, last and final question. This is going to encompass a few important topics you guys had asked about, so hopefully it'll answer everything you want to know as far as this category. Breeding behavior versus aggressive behavior. This is an excellent question because in the beginning, it's all going to look like aggression. Nature is brutal in itself, and reptiles especially do not have sex the same way that we have sex. So it can be alarming if you're not used to seeing reptiles do their thing, and especially when you get into some more aggressive species. Now, gargoyle geckos are not like leachianas. They're not that bad. You're not going to wake up and, well, typically, I don't ever want to say never, but you typically aren't going to wake up and have a guard with a dislocated jaw or missing a whole leg or something like that. However, they're not like crested geckos either. They do have sharp teeth, they do have sharp claws, and they can very much get feisty and cause some trauma to the skin. When the male is courting the female, he's going to chase her. Now, gargs aren't typically going to lock up for you in front of you. I've never had that happen. I have caught them after they've already started the chasing and courting, but I have never had them go into a box and do it in front of me like crested geckos. You may get lucky and get one that does. Most of the time, that's not going to happen. So if you are lucky enough to actually catch it, then you'll have to worry about the difference. Otherwise, you're going to be looking the day after for certain signs that your male and female are still doing well together. Now, when they court, chasing is absolutely typical. They're going to do that. If you come in your reptile room in the middle of the night, like I like to do a lot, you'll hear them. You'll hear them making little chirps. You'll hear them chasing each other up and down. You might hear them slapping the glass. The difference is if you hear both of them kind of just ravishly growling and it sounds like it's not what it's supposed to sound like, follow your gut feeling, take a peek, because that might be exactly what's going on. Usually it's not as crazy. Now, it does sound crazy when they're chasing each other and hitting the glass, but when the growling and the chirping starts, usually, at least for me, I can usually tell by sound what sounds like it's supposed to and what doesn't. Also, if you do catch them and you see them, there's going to be scratching, there's going to be biting, and things of that nature. The male is going to latch onto her wherever he can at first to try to pin her. I've had them latch onto a leg, back, whatever, but typically once they get in position, they're going to try to move themselves up to the neck or even the horns. So a good way in the morning, if you don't see it, a good way in the morning to check if your female and male have done what they need to do is to look for a little bit of scarring. Now, I don't have any pictures of this. We're out of breeding season right now, so I don't have any right now to show you any pictures of, but typically it looks like little ash or flakes of skin. Nothing alarming. It looks like if you take your nail and you scratch your dry skin, how it just has a couple flakes. You're going to see a little bit of that all over your Garg's tail, maybe a little bit on the back, mostly around the neck and head. When there is aggression, the female's not going to be responsive, and one, your male's going to have a lot of trauma if she's fighting back. That's not typically something you see when you have a good workable pair, because the female's going to submit. She's going to allow him to do what he needs to do, and she's not going to be biting and scratching and, you know, trying to attack him. So you're not going to see a ton of damage on your male if they are compatible. You may see some bites on the head and some bites on the neck. Again, that flakiness and scarring. But if you see a ton of scarring on your male, that is a good sign that your female is not feeling this male, or your male is not strong enough to dominate this female. There's also times when the female is going to be busted up. I had one this year. She laid eggs. I waited a good month before I decided to pair her, but she was not receptive. And this was one of my favorite males this season because he was so excited to breed. So I knew he could get the job done, but she was not having it, and oh my God, it broke my heart to see her the next morning. I've never had an animal this beat up and scarred, but it's a great learning experience, and it kind of will let you see what you just know. As an animal lover, when you see this, you know this is not what's okay. So you learn as you go when it comes to this stuff. I also have males sometimes that are overly excited breeders, and so they may cause a lot of unnecessary damage even to a submitting female in the neck area. A couple years ago, Bloody Mary went through that. She was paired up with Crayola, and you could tell there was not any scarring or biting anywhere on her back or tail, which told me that she was probably submissive and letting him handle, but he was just too excited, so he probably kept biting her in the neck, and her whole back of her neck looked raw and opened and sorry. It just looked awful. So there's a couple things you can do. One, that tells you that most likely your male and female are doing okay, they're breeding, but because it's open tissue and he'll try to breed her again, I separated, I let her heal up for the month, and then I repaired them. I also have learned when you have a male that is overly anxious like that and just overly aggressive when he breeds, sometimes it's better to do a trio with that male if you have a female that you want, another female that you want to pair him to. All right, guys, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, this is my perspective. This is my experience. Totally maybe different from somebody else's. That's okay. I'm not saying if a different breeder does it differently, they're not correct. That maybe works for them, and that may be what works for their animals. But if you're watching my channel and you want my experience on it, this is just how I do it, and I've had great success. And of course, every day I am learning something new from these animals. I can only acquire so much information from somebody else. A lot of it is going to come from experience. Every animal, no matter what species, is going to be a little different individually. They all have different personalities. They're all going to respond to different situations like breeding, egg laying, etc. differently. So again, a lot of it's going to come from your own experience, but you can never be too prepared, and you can never stop remaining teachable. That is my biggest key to me having success working with my animals, is I'm always willing to humble myself and say, I don't know everything. I need to keep learning. I need to let them, this isn't a gargoyle gecko, but I need to let my animals teach me what they need to teach me so that I am best taking care of them, best nurturing them, especially during situations like breeding, leg laying, etc. So again, this is just my experience. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it will be useful to a few of you. Thanks again for watching, and y'all have an amazing week, and I will see you next week.